under the internet. Oh, was the meeting in trouble isn't there?
Welcome everyone. It's 5:30, so we will begin the work session. And in the back room, if we need to speak up or not or something, just give us the signal how we're doing back there, because we are also virtual. So to join virtually, you can go on jeffersoncity.mo.gov, our website, and you can click the link that's on the agenda, or you can call in. That number is 404-397-1516. The meeting number is 187-866-2235, and the meeting password is 1234. So with that, I will call to order the Monday, March 29th, 2021 City Council work session. Mrs. Donaldson, roll call, please.
Fitzwater.
Present.
Graham.
Here.
Hensley.
Present.
Hussey.
Here.
Kimna.
Here.
Lester.
Here.
Schreiber. Vogt.
Here.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
Present. Item 3, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda by also adding public comment after both item 4 and 5. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved. Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 4, City County Sales Tax H projects update. So I will turn it over to Mr. Marash for an update. Thank you.
And I had given this same update at a Public Works and Planning Committee meeting earlier this month, so it's kind of a repeat of that for some of you. But I believe some thought it might be a good idea to do it for the whole council. I get a lot of questions about city-county projects and upcoming sales tax, half-cent capital improvement sales tax, what might or might not be included, or what the staff recommendation was from the previous work session. And really, this just expands on that. So in this memo, and I'll have it up on the screen as well, anything highlighted in red is what we had previously indicated at the previous work session. And just expanded the list here because I know there was a few questions at that meeting. Jump in here real quick. I won't take a whole lot of your time. But basically, engineering maintains a list of projects from various master plans, traffic studies, when development projects come along, things like that. And then we try to assign, a relative planning dollar level amount to it. And on our list right now, there's about $50 million of projects, kind of a menu of projects, if you will, and they're in this memo. Scroll down. This is working. Let's get to the list here. It's the meat of it. But so during the last presentation, there were several questions about what was on the list and what wasn't on the list, and et cetera. And again, this is just a staff recommendation from our side. So once the council kind of weighed in, we'd also then need to go back to Cole County Commission and get their input. And it's a collaborative process. So from our recommendation, see, we started out with bridges, so that's one of our big projects. And I think the county has talked about this as well in their sales tax meetings that they're going to work on with the city. But basically the High Street Viaduct or Bridge near Truman, St. Peter's, that area over Missouri Boulevard. And then it connects up to the fire station on the other side. Is a pretty big project. About $5 million is a good estimate for that, we believe. The and total of projects for city and county is $11 million. So let's start there. So we typically have $11 million in the last couple of sales taxes we worked on. Now that amount hasn't changed over the last 10 or 15 years, whatever we've been doing this. Anyway, High Street Viaduct, about $5 million. Obviously the bridge is in disrepair. If you've been by it, it needs work. From the underside, you can see concrete falling off, and we go collect pieces every once in a while. And there's a lot of pedestrians in that area walking to their work at Truman Building in various places. And the top of it, we've treated the surface and taken out pieces of concrete, and we'll knock a hole in it, see through it occasionally, but it's not in danger of falling down or anything like that. But it is in rough shape. And then if you were to look at the pedestrian accommodations, they're not up to standard. The lighting really needs work as well. So just kind of a rework of the whole thing. There was some debate, could you rehab it, a major rehab? Well, maybe, but this is just reserving money saying, hey, we want to work on that in the next 5 years. And we'll hire an engineer that's qualified to give us a lot of good guidance of whether it's a full takedown and replacement or a major rehab. They may end up costing about the same money anyway. Looking at the erosion and things going on underneath of it, where the piers are located, it hangs up a lot of brush. I mean, the whole thing's on the table to look at. And we would suggest reserving about 5 of that 11 million just for this bridge. So it'd be one of the biggest projects we've done in the sales tax with the county. But a good project that's well needed. A lot of people remember flood in '93. It was one of the few ways to get across east-west of town without going too far out. Expressway was underwater as well. So it's a good connection. A lot of discussion about it in the past, and we've had studies done on it the last 5 or 10 years. So that's kind of that. Now, we also know the Ohio Street Bridge. I think Councilman Ward brought up the Ohio Street Bridge. Well, that's been out of service for some time now. It's about a $500,000 project, and to replace it, we do allow pedestrians and bicycles, things like that, to go across it, but no car traffic. There is a route around over to Kansas Street. It's a very low volume street. And really it just leads to the park. Essentially, if you go through the park, then you can get to some residences, but certainly it'd be a good thing to do. But with $500,000, this didn't rise to our level of recommendation with the amount of traffic it carries. So that's kind of a bridge section. I could keep going through the whole list, or if you have a question, just ask me as I go. I think it's probably the best way to do it. But so then we kind of look at another category of projects, intersections or corridor improvements, that kind of thing. And we suggested working on the stadium corridor and suggested about $3 million be set aside to look at that. And that's the stadium corridor from basically Edgewood back around past Helias towards the new roundabout at Stadium Jefferson area. Anyway, within that corridor, there's probably almost over $10 million of projects to be worked on. Stadium Southwest intersection is one of the major thoroughfares of the city, 2 cross points. And the stadium corridor in this area carries around 10,000 cars a day. So if it connects shopping, medical on both ends. And if you're coming from the east side trying to get to like a major shopping center like a Walmart or a Target or over there by Menards, you're using this corridor. Then all 3 high schools are located off of it. So a lot of traffic for a city street. It's one of our highest traffic counts. We know, and I listed the intersection improvements here. So Edgewood roundabouts, we know when the new high school went in, there was some discussion about a couple roundabouts there at Stadium and Creek Trail as well, and Edgewood, and that's about a 4.6. Obviously, $3 million isn't going to tick off many of these, but it gets us started, and it's kind of the way we approached working on McCarty Street in the past, and where we did that in about 4 different phases over time, and eventually got the whole corridor built out from downtown all the way through out to the East Walmart. And so that took a long time to do, but by plugging away at it a little at a time, you're able to really improve a corridor. I listed the other one, Stadium and Satinwood roundabout. We know we did the flood study there. And so there's probably some work there, not only to do with the roadway, but maybe some stormwater improvements in that area as well. So all of these are on the table in my mind if we proceed with this recommendation. And then also when Helias did the new stadium improvement, where there was quite a bit of discussion about another roundabout at Myrtle Street. A lot of traffic comes out of that area. It's a good cut through from Missouri Boulevard actually all the way over to Stadium. A lot of people use it besides the high school. And, recently when we had the state football championships here last year, we had multiple stadiums going, people from out of town. I had guests in town from Jackson, Missouri, because their kids were in the football championship. And, of course, local teams were in it as well. But so those folks knew how to get around, but people from out of town don't. So I suspect that'll just continue as more sports venues are built along the same corridor over at Jefferson City High School. And so it's a good thing to work on this corridor for even folks from out of town. Pavement's in rough condition in many places, no sidewalks through this whole area. And just, we could do a lot of different things here, but it's a corridor that hasn't seen a lot of work in the last 20 years that I've been here, almost. And so we'd like to focus on that over the next several years. Other intersections and corridors that, certainly we've either studied with through various programs with MoDOT, but Truman and Scott Station, we're not suggesting doing that. It's not anything in red is what we suggested to do, but it could be done. We have a traffic study on it showing that it could use a roundabout or a signal. Seven Hills, Bald Hill, as well as Ellis and Greenberry, all discuss major thoroughfare around Ellis corridor. Excuse me. But again, the traffic level and just, there's not a lot of development there right now is pushing this like there is along the stadium corridor. I'll scoot on down here a little bit. Monroe Street. And so we have talked about Monroe Street. People asked about this at the last meeting as well. But several years ago, we talked about the whole corridor being a major upgrade if it were built to more of a thoroughfare basis throughout its entirety. That'd be about a $3 million project, quite a bit of money. This carries just a little over 1,000 cars a day. And so, from that level right there, it's hard to recommend doing the whole corridor update. Great. But I know one of the main emphasis of that corridor was to get two-way traffic moving through. Here, what I call the rock cut at Dunklin. We've had some issues with the rock sliding and the retaining wall. That signal at Dunklin and Monroe could use an update. It's the last older style pedestal type signal that's over on the corner instead of overhead. So that could use some upgrades. So I highlighted it in blue, kind of maybe an issue that we could work on for about $1 million. Now that could occur in this corridor, take money away from stadium, or really the next category, economic development, is another thing we recommend. We always recommend some economic development funds. And so in this sales tax, we're recommending about $3 million. So certainly Monroe Street corridor or that two-way and the rock cut issue, that kind of thing could fit in there easily. Could fit in a couple of different places, but that'd probably be where I would look if you were asking me to use about $1 million of that $3 million to work on that corridor and get the two-way traffic flowing and take care of the rock and signal issues. Other things in there, something's going to come up obviously in the next 5 years that we're going to need a road improvement or something for a new development to happen or new whatever. Things happen, they do every time, and that's why we always have some type of economic development pool. But I went ahead and listed also all the different highway interchange, including Clark, who's on there. And if the council wanted to, we could probably get some grant money to do work on some of these interchanges. They are MoDOT interchanges, but MoDOT does have a 50-50 cost share program. That's what the number represents on the screen, and so our Campo folks have done a lot of study of these and the accidents and all of that. And some other things on there besides interchange, I should say, is the Missouri Boulevard there near 179 through Wildwood. We often hear a lot of complaints about crashes there where there's no center turn lane in front of the car dealerships. And so that's listed on here as well. So these are things, that have come up over time. I'm not saying to exactly do them, but they would fit under this category as well. If you were able to get a grant, so you could double your money essentially by working on this. And a lot of people in the city obviously they don't know or care probably who's supposed to maintain the intersection. They just know if they have a problem. And so it might be something to look at if some funds available. But again, I think this might be a good use. And I should say on the Monroe Street side of things, one reason I know they're doing some expansions at the hospital, and we worked with the hospital in the past there. Obviously things going on around the high school and back to the, out of town sports folks coming through. So it might be nice to have a two-way corridor through there, this area up, and that to me would fit under that category. So I didn't go into this level of detail last time at the meeting, obviously, but we were going through this a little more detailed look. And then new roads and future corridors for development. So three that have been discussed quite a bit. Wildwood, which goes from basically Edgewood at Wildwood over to Rock Ridge. Pretty expensive project. The county actually has some design on that. A lot of that corridor is outside the city limits. Certainly, building a road corridor is fine, but we didn't recommend any of these projects. Mission Drive is basically the continuation from 179 back to the Wildwood extension listed on here, the one Mr. Brown has talked about a lot. And then out on the east end, we hear a lot from one of the commission, Militia Drive, Highway 50 and Liberty Road. Now that was probably a result of cutting off some traffic crossovers. MoDOT did that work several years ago. Really, this one doesn't really benefit anything in the city either. At this point, it may be a way for folks to drive around those crossovers, but it really has the same effect as what they already do. Drive down to the highway, go up to the interchange, turn around and come back. So wouldn't recommend any of them, but I'd be glad to discuss them in more detail. But one reason is someone would open up a new corridor maybe for more developable land, things like that. In the city, there's certainly a lot space available along Edgewood, a lot in the stadium quarry available. Missouri Boulevard continues to redevelop. And so just building a road would be out into this area, be very speculative. Could be done if that's what the council and the city or county want to do, city council and the county commission want to do. But I personally wouldn't recommend it just because of speculative nature and there's other needs currently existing inside the city limits. And again, the goal of one of the half-cent sales tax was to work on projects in the city limits currently. So again, those are our recommendations highlighted in red. I threw in the blue this time around just to highlight the Monroe Street where it could fit. That was a desire. Of course, the council can change this or do whatever they would like. And we'll go up and discuss it. Once the council weighs in, we'd go up and discuss it with the county in more detail and come to some agreement on it.
Mr. Marash, are there any questions or comments? Councilman Fitzwater.
Yeah, Mr. Marash, I had a question. There's been some discussion around concerns about the update at Riverside Park and the amphitheater there. Is that a project that at some point would be on a list like this, or have you not even had the opportunity to look at that, the options there?
Yeah, we've discussed that actually. So a lot of folks talk about upgrades to Grant Street. It's escaping me. Grant Street, yes, Grant Street. And we have been working on a project on Grant Street, a sidewalk project basically, and cleaning up some of the ways you could get through there. Now, one of the problems with that is if there were a large expansion there, it would eat up a lot of money. The houses are very close to the road, be taken out, 10 houses or so, displacing a lot of people. Typically, we haven't done that in a lot of city projects. And really what we looked at when we did look at that, so we're going to have an update about Grant Street at a future Public Works and Planning Committee meeting, probably in April, to talk about that road project, make sure we're on the right track with that from the council's perspective. But really a lot of the traffic from that we've talked to Todd, I think he's here, about how the amphitheater is going to function. But a lot of the traffic will flow more than likely especially from out of town folks. So a lot of times, if you're live in the city, know your way around, you're going to go however you're going to go and get there pretty easily. If you're from out of town, a lot of folks might be coming in, we feel like on Capitol Avenue, down to Riverside and around. So there is some work that could be done there. Kind of in conjunction, we see how the MSP shakes out. That's our thought is certainly we can clean up some direction signs there. Some of our wayfinding signs we already have in place could be amended to really get people into that. That would be kind of what we are looking at. Seems it's probably a little premature to jump in, I would think, and do a very large project there. It's a pretty good distance of road you'd have to upgrade. We're already working on some Greenway Trail upgrades through there, as well as sidewalk along Capitol Riverside area connection there.
Any further questions or comments? Councilman Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Marash. I have just a quick question for you. At the end, you had stated about the new roads and staff would not recommend. Was it all three of these, or was it one on top of the other, or all three?
No, we didn't recommend any of them at this time.
Oh, so none of these three is recommended at all?
No.
Okay.
Councilman Hussey?
Just a couple comments, not really questions, Matt, but I guess if the council's desire is to include the Monroe Street, like the two-way rock issue, I see that more as a traditional corridor upgrade. And so I do wonder if there's value in increasing the amount in the corridor upgrade budget line item as opposed to calling it economic development and kind of like, well, I guess my question would be the dollar amounts slotted here are somewhat arbitrary, 3 million here, 5 million there. We haven't committed to the county to say we're gonna have 3 million in development, have we?
There's been no commitments to the county that I'm aware of.
So I guess I wonder if there's value in not calling that sort of, I like your idea of economic development and the sort of looking like that. I guess to fund Monroe Street sort of out of that feels like not traditionally maybe how we've done economic development related uses of that, at least for me, it seems like it's always either it's an incentive project for a business to arrive here, or it's been in partnership with another agency that might put some money into it. And then I guess secondly, for the stadium, $3 million allocation, am I to take that that's sort of, it'd be nice to dedicate 3 million, but if it was 2.75 or 3.25, that there's nothing hard and fast about 3 in particular. It's just that there's project, we know we're going to have to put some money towards that corridor over the next 10 to 15 years, correct?
Correct. I would think, yeah, that's what we're suggesting, to put some amount of money to it. We suggested 3 million. You can see the project list there. We haven't studied it in detail. Obviously, a lot of times what we do is kind of pick off 1 or 2 on either end, maybe in this case in the middle,
Yeah.
maybe a little of both. Try to get some, especially in this case, pedestrian movements with, I see a lot of, probably high school kids, I guess, out running after school, cross country probably, or whatever. This corridor, they're out running in the street, so.
One, I wonder if there's, I mean, I think a lot of these decisions might get made by the rest of you and folks at the table, but I guess I would advocate for a way to include the Ohio Street Bridge replacement, just because I get that the traffic count may not be there. Guessing the life expectancy for a new bridge would be pretty long there, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
50 years.
So for me, $500,000 to sort of take care of that project, it's been out of service. While there are workarounds, and while it may look like it dumps to the park, it's still a way for folks that live in those homes back there navigate out without having to loop around. I guess I see it as like, if it's not done in this phase, it just continues on, and it's gonna be an issue that's there. And at this point, $500,000 to take care of it next 5 years for me would make more sense. I would even advocate then to put Monroe Street in the corridor things and increase that to 3.5. I'm gonna guess the Monroe Street project might be done earlier in the 5-year projection, just because the athletic complex and the Cap Region stuff comes online a little sooner. And that timing for maybe some of the Stadium Boulevard improvements might have to correspond more to the school year. Like if you're doing Myrtle Street, for example, I doubt
Yeah.
Elias wants you to do that from September through May if you can avoid it.
Yeah, there's probably no good time to work on Stadium just because of the high traffic count. Hence the need.
Yeah.
But, yeah, we figured those things out. And, really, I don't have any, unless the council makes it a huge, this is the top priority or something like that. I mean, there's other priorities ongoing right now with MSP, things like that. Some engineers, so it's going to
Yeah.
take a little time to get through some of these. But arts tax doesn't actually start until a year.
So that's, I guess, my 2 cents is to find a way to do the two-way Monroe, but also take care of Ohio Street Bridge. That project done for the folks that live around it, and have that back. Serves those neighborhoods, and if it's got a 50-year shelf life on it, that seems like a wise investment.
Councilman Lester?
You haven't marked it as such, but would the two-way Monroe qualify as a city-county since the hospital serves the whole region?
Well, yeah, everything on this list we're talking about would be a city-county project. Or that's what we're suggesting. That's all we're really talking about today is the city-county pool of funds, that 5.5 million from each, 11 million total.
There, Councilwoman Ward?
Agree with Councilman Hussey's comments, but I did have a question regarding Monroe. If we went the $1 million route and we took care of that section that needs to be two-way, would you develop and plan that the way the South Side plan addresses the corridor? Or would it be, just priority to get it two-way and then at a later date, address how that plan envisioned that corridor to look?
Well, certainly we always look at all the master plans when we start these projects. There are probably some things in there that will be able to be done. Right now, there's a parking issue is why it's not two-way. So we have some creative ways to, we use on the other end of Monroe Street, just across from the hospital when we had to take a couple houses out. You start taking out 10 houses, you spend all your money buying 10 houses and displacing a lot of people. Same area that we'll talk about the poor property to live in. So I don't think that's what the council wants to do, but we might, yes, if that's what y'all suggest. But certainly we look at all those master plans, and there's no definitive design thought of at this point. It's just some schematics of what to do and how to get we figure out what the goal is, two-way, clean up the area from rock cut, signals, that kind of thing. Make sure there's good sidewalks, things of that nature. So that would be our starting goal, and then adding in amenities later.
Okay, I was just trying to avoid, investing $1 million. That investment was originally envisioned.
Yeah, we would try to do things that we would tear up later.
Okay.
Certainly.
Right.
Other questions, comments, feedback on the list? Mr. Marash?
Thanks.
We also do have some public comment on this item, so I'll invite up Mr. Phil Freeman. Welcome.
Thank you, City Council. I'm here basically to kind of give you a history on issue. It's been talked about for quite some years ago. Albert Calvaruso, when he became development plan South Side, they did a complete overview of the South Side, how structure, et cetera, et cetera. Plan took about a year. Zoning Commission, and they the city plan. I think the things that we need to understand about this is, it's so you understand, we're not dual lane. Most of it already is dual lane. Talking about from Hickory Street to Franklin Street. I'd say we're probably 250 yards, maybe, are some homes on the west side, utilities on the east side. It's going to be a tricky. Several things that we want. Rock cut in the 600 block is sidewalks blocked off, the rocks are falling down, and it's in despair. Capital Region is going to start shortly outpatient expansion service, and most of that entrance will come off of the street, so that's going to increase. Also, further down at Stadium Row, several years ago, electronic intersections. And if we could two-way Monroe, I think that would take a lot of traffic off of Madison Street. I'm on Madison Street. I own Sanctuary, so we see the other issue is, of course, their high school, Jeff City High School, is going to start in the spring with a whole new athletic complex. It's going to take up. There's going to be a soccer field, baseball field, softball field, tennis courts, which is going to increase the traffic. So those reasons are encouraging the council to consider the development of the street. As I said, it's going to be a difficult design task for your engineering crew, but I'm sure they can. I've had several conversations with members of the Polk County Commission, and certainly there is no commitment. Seem interested, so I think this could be joint city-county. Most of the things displace too many residents, but that is the last thing I'll say. That when the tornado hit in that area, this really inhibited emergency personnel to enter that area. Major artery that has just 2 blocks of street, it just simply doesn't make sense. So I would encourage you to consider the Monroe Street project, the entirety of it. If I said chairman of the Southside Old Development support it, and we will do it. That being said, I would be happy to answer questions that anyone might have about how we've gotten to this point and ending.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Are there any questions from council?
I have a question. It's probably from Matt
Councilman Graham?
or Mr. Freeman. Do you know how many homes are we talking about on the west side of the
There
street?
on the west side, I believe, Carlos, there's 12.
12, okay.
And if my numbers are right, 4 of them are on the side, Mr. Reynolds.
Okay.
And the utilities are on the east side. They're within about a foot of the street. Now, I talked to Matt about that and this question. Utilities are on city right of way, that he can make them move. Should probably be pressing that and not me. So as I said, it will be a difficult design challenge because one side and the other. So there will be some displacement, hopefully not. There's best I can remember, there's 4 of them occupied, the rest were rentals.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Thank
time
you
this
for your
evening.
time.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak on the item 4? Anyone on the line? Okay. So we will move on now to item 5, discussion of the possible public safety tax. Mr. Kroll.
Thank you. This is a discussion about the public safety tax. Maybe I'll pull the memo up. I don't think I'll go through all the specifics of the memo, but just give some general highlights. And if you have any questions, certainly feel free to ask as we go along, and staff is here to be able to answer any questions that you may have. So a brief overview, then the questions really to answer are related to the ballot language. So really to talk about the proposed ballot language, to go through some of the specifics about whether you want sunset or a perpetual, and then again, a little bit about some of the projects, and most of this is information you have talked about before. So the ballot question then really relates to the issues that I just mentioned and the proposed language. And the proposed language, the other information that I think you answered was whether you wanted it to be 1/4% or 1/8%. And I think council decided on 1/4%, but that certainly can change to any amount that you want to do. So the certification date then is May 25th, 2021, which is the last date for certification. And the last regularly scheduled council meeting is May 18th. And again, this information is available on our website as well. And the effective date of the ordinance is January 22nd, or January 2022. If you go to attachment 2, you get a sense of how much of our budget really is personnel, and it's almost 80%. So about 80% of the general fund budget is personnel related, and the rest of it, other budget areas, other funds are about the same as well. We also have in there, in addition to the 80% personnel, other items such as utilities, which are fairly fixed, contracts and some things like that. So once you look at those particular numbers, there's very little discretionary spending available from, at least in this particular case we're talking about, is the general fund budget. Sunset or perpetual, we have provided some additional information from some other cities and whether they are really have a sunset or a perpetual. Out of the 19 cities that are on the survey, are you able to pull that up as I'm talking? Let's see. Attachment 5. So out of the 19 cities there, most of them have a public safety tax that is perpetual. I would note that for Cape Girardeau, actually they have what's a hybrid. It's really for their operational tax that is perpetual, and then they've got a piece of their tax that is for capital, which is sunsets. So really for them, even their perpetual, their salaries are in the perpetual piece in the portion of that. I said if there are any questions, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. Questions, certainly feel free to ask. The sunset versus perpetual, as I mentioned, we've got some pieces that reflect what the perpetual is and the dollar amounts that we anticipate coming through that. Attachment 5 is a survey of some selected cities that we staff went through and did. It's probably going to be hard to read on the screen, but essentially that tells us pretty much what we already knew. We're very low overall salaries for all city employees, all the positions, certainly the ones, these are not all of our positions that are depicted here, but out of all of the positions, we're either very low or kind of low on some of the areas, and certainly for the public safety positions, police and fire, we're very low. And you can see that as that information. Again, it's kind of hard for you to see on the screen, but nonetheless, those were in our packet provided. And as I did mention, Cape Girardeau, it's a little bit misleading there, but they do have it in two pieces. One, and their salaries are in a perpetual portion of that. At least that's our understanding. I don't particularly recommend a sunset provision with an ongoing salary and benefit portion there. It's also a little bit inconsistent with our financial policies, and you all have done such a great job of developing those financial policies and adhering to those. But certainly, sunset provision is certainly one of the pieces that could be in there. That's pretty much all I had as far as different pieces of the memo and some of the information that was in there. We did provide the prior projects and staffs here if we need to go through all those again. We don't really need to, at least in my opinion, have the projects identified for the ballot language, and certainly can't be in that ballot language, but even prior to adoption of that, nor do we need to have the salary pieces and what that may all look like. Certainly can have some time to develop. So open to any questions or any comments that you may have, and certainly, as I said, staff is here as well.
Thank you for the overview of the memo. Are there any questions for Mr. Kroll? Councilman Hesse?
Thank you, Steve. On the, in the memo, you reference a 10% increase across the board, approximate $1.5 million. Just for clarity, that's an annual expense, an ongoing expense of that amount each year, correct?
Correct. It would increase every year. And that's just an estimate to try to give you a sense. I don't know that that's the right number. In fact, I would suggest that as we do get a little bit closer, in fact, I would suggest after, if the tax is approved, that afterwards we develop a little more specific kind of a plan for the compensation.
Yeah.
So that's just to give you an idea of how much money would be.
I just wanted to clarify.
And then, of course, that increases every year. And the longer the time period, if there is a sunset, I know you know this, but if there is a sunset, and the longer that time period, the larger that number becomes. And at least in my view, it would be a more difficult number to try to address.
Thank you. Good question. And let's see if there's any other questions here for Mr. Kroll on the memo, and then we'll run through the three questions that are before us and decide what direction we'll go for the next council meeting. So any
Yeah,
other questions for Steve?
just one
Councilman
question.
Graham?
Mr. Kroll, in regards to the different cities that had a sunset or perpetual or going on the ballot in April, all of those cities, as it relates to the public safety tax or law enforcement tax, is all the salaries coming out of that tax, or is some being supplemented through revenue?
I don't know if all of their salaries come out of that tax. I don't know. I don't know if Justin would know that either. We can find that out. I know in some cases, and I think Cape Girardeau is one of those, it's a portion. And then, as I said, for the salary pieces, which is a portion of that's on the screen, we just selected some specific positions. And I think it's important for council to also consider, as you're talking about public safety, obviously, to also consider what the rest of the city salaries and positions are. And I said in some cases, those are either very low to a little bit low. Surveyed cities.
Questions for the memo for Steve at the moment? For the overview, and you may want to either stay there, or I guess you have your mic at your seat as well for some further, I'm sure we'll have further questions here as we move forward. And looking at the memo, there are three specific items that we will address. And as we know, this particular item is on the informal calendar, meaning that we will likely take that up at the next city council meeting, which is a week from tonight on April 5th, Monday night. So it would be good to go through and have some discussion on those three items. The first one is the proposed ballot language and decision deadline for the tax, which Steve went through, Mr. Kroll did, and is laid out with the deadline to get that on the August ballot. So is there any other further discussion on that forward as we have been? Councilman Hensley?
Thank you very much. I think both of these taxes, both the sales tax H proposal and this public safety tax proposal, are vitally important. Get them both before the voters as soon as possible. I don't think that there is really much value in trying to our way into guessing at perfect ballot slots and assignments for these things. I think August makes sense for both of these items. Recommend continuing on with this ballot.
Thank you, Councilman Hensley. Councilwoman Weisman?
I just want to make a
quick note. It is going to save us money to go have it on that August ballot because there's nothing else on that November ballot, and it's going to have to pay for 2 elections. if We do it on the November ballot. So, in addition to, I think, run at the same time anyway, it is a cost savings for us to do them both on the August ballot, and I just want to note that, taking that forward.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
I was gonna
Councilman
say the
Reed.
same thing as relates to the cost, looking about $40,000 to $50,000. Is that it to put it on the ballot in November by itself? That safe to say? Safe to say.
I think that's safe to say.
Okay, so certainly that is a savings because you're gonna spend more money just to put it on the ballot. We already have something on the ballot going in August. So it certainly, makes sense.
For those comments, and looking at the second item is the,
We got.
oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Fitzwater.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. As I discussed at the last meeting, and again, I want to preface that I think everybody sitting around this table is committed to finding additional dollars for our public safety. But in my mind, that is not a discussion point. My concern, and I've tried to talk to a number of people in the community that have been involved in ballot initiatives, I'm still concerned about having 2 tax issues, especially one of them being on a new tax, being on the same ballot. And I know there's been thought given to why to do that and why not to do that. Just concerned about having both of them on the August ballot, and I'd like to just caution that we run the risk of potentially losing both. There are a lot of moving parts in our economy right now, and I hope we have a plan B if that's the direction that this council goes, because it is not a slam dunk. I mean, I think the reasons that we want to do it is a very positive, so I mean, I think that gains some votes. We better be very sure that that is enough to get this thing across the finish line, because there are comments out there, people that are concerned, and like I say, there are a lot of moving parts to our community and our economy. And I would just hope that we're thinking this through before that's going to be the final decision, because as I indicated, there are people that have been involved in other failed initiatives in this town that raise questions on why we want to do that. My comments.
Thank you, Councilman Fitzwater, and I think that that is a very natural concern to have and something we need to be very conscious of, the importance of getting the message out. And we do have that message, and we do have that story, and we do have the reasons why this is so critically important if we want to maintain our level of public safety, if we want to take care of not only the salary piece, but retaining the best officers and retaining, when it's in police and fire, recruiting and retaining the best. And we can go on about a lot of the reasons why. So we need to make sure that we're able to communicate that. Really, regardless of when that's on the ballot, that would be an issue no matter what. But certainly I see a point. And something else which I did fail to mention was that the county's 8th cent will sunset 22. Pardon me? I believe so. So I think starting in 23, that would be gone. So there is an 8th cent then that people are would no longer be paying, that would be, in a way, in a sense, picked up on this. So it would be less of a, although it is a new tax, people are already paying some for public safety currently just through the county, and now this would be shifted to the city. So I think that could also give some ease to the public to know that there's also that piece of it as well. But all very good points, and we need to make sure that we, yes, Councilman Fitzwater?
Well, if I could just respond to that, I appreciate that comment. And I know that the discussion has been not to put a lot of specifics around this, but there are a lot of people asking for specifics so that they're comfortable that, do we need an eighth? Do we need a quarter? Do we need 3/8? I guess my question is, at what point will we have that information so that we can talk to voters other than just saying, trust us, pass it. Sales tax H has a potentially sales tax H. Those taxes, the capital improvement tax has a 35-year track record that I think we could all successfully defend the fact that we've done a pretty good job. Former councils, I mean, I on this one very long, but former councils and this one have not missed merit very many times. We've missed some. But we don't have a track record with this one other than we have a great police department and fire department. We want to keep them. We want to make it strong. We've got a crime issue in this city. It's very important. But people are asking for more than just, we want to address that. They want to know how we're going to address it, where the dollar's going to. So if we don't know that on March 29th, are we going to April 29th, May 29th? At what point will we know what's going in there so that we can defend when we get the naysayers? As you know, there are some in this town, and again, I don't even think it's because they're opposed to the police. They're just opposed to paying new taxes. So I know that there are people that have been involved in this a lot longer than I have, but when I weigh things, I would like to know what I'm spending my dollars on, and that's my concern, that we're not answering that question. Just saying new salaries, again, it doesn't talk to me about, is it how much in the salaries? Is it going to compression? Mr. Kroll indicated, the fact that there's not a lot of margin in our budget. We've got 250 or so, 200 plus other employees in City Hall that, we're going to have some kind of equity within our system. Maybe not the percentage increases, but we've talked a long time about compression issue. There's I think a 4 or 5 year old report now. I just think having some specifics would help us as council to make an informed decision rather than just making a decision, and I think it makes it stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Fitzwater, and we will touch on that a little bit here under item 3, the proposed uses of anticipated revenues from the tax. So we'll touch on that a little bit too this evening. And your point is very well taken, and I agree completely. The public is asking and wants to know, and what we're hearing from the public is they want to make sure that we have a strong community policing, that we have officers that have good relationships in the neighborhoods, and in order to do that, they need to be here long enough to establish the trust in our neighborhoods and within our community. And while we've had a good track record with that, it's something we need to build and maintain and continue. We're facing increased competition from other areas and cities, and we train very well, and other cities know that. And we want to retain our officers over the long term to get what people really are asking for and what they need. We need to be able to convey that and tell that story. And I think that what you're saying, I mean, there's certain steps that will follow as we build this. These are not all things that are decided tonight. The first steps are deciding that it will go on the August ballot, what's the sunset, some projected uses, and then as we go through, then the next step will be opening it up and having our public safety leadership and Chief Schofield and Chief Schrader and others that will be helping to determine some of those specific uses as well. But we'll go through all of those steps, and appreciate the input and comments, because those are questions that we're all getting and want to be prepared to answer, not just us, but also those that are working on this as well. Councilman Lester?
I just wanted to say we all want these both to pass. Know the needs for both areas. Certainly public safety tax. But I've heard similar concerns as Councilman Fitzwater has expressed, and those concerns are from people that I know also recognize the need to pass. So I do think we need to be strategic. If likely it would pass in November, that's something that should be discussed. If we put it on and it's not passed, I think put it on in November. But yeah, the need is not going to go away.
Appreciate that comment. And to your point, the few that have mentioned that same concern actually have all been supportive. I haven't heard anyone who said they're not supportive of the tax, but they would be if it were in a different month. that they would be August as opposed to November. So interestingly, I have heard that all who have made those comments to me have all been supportive of both the renewal and safety tax, which has been interesting. So it's not that they're not supportive or would prefer it on a different ballot, but overall they have been supportive. Councilman Kemna?
Oh,
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I just wanted to echo what they've been hearing and I've been hearing. I think a lot of this too is it's hard to gauge how voters are going to vote when it comes to this. And putting a increase on the same ballot as a tax that's already currently going, I find there's some risks. I know it costs more money to do it in November, but if we put on a tax increase and that's the only thing that's on the ballot in November, and we're asking voters to come out and say yes or no on this, I think that gives us also 3 months as a city to campaign for just this. I think there could be some wisdom in that. I know it's more expensive, but I would hate to put this on a ballot and voters come out and vote both down. And it's hard to gauge how they're going to turn out. That's my concern if we both put them on or if we put both on the August ballot.
Other comments? Mr. Kroll?
For the microphone, so I don't know. And as I put in the memo, there may be some advantage to having the consultant that did our 2016 study come and refresh that study. May be able to help get a number, and I think the cost of that would be about $15,000 or $20,000. But it's not as easy. The number for salaries, whether it's just public safety or if it includes the other employees, it's not as easy as just picking a number and saying it's 10%. That number was just put in, as Councilmember Hussey mentioned, just for a number to be able to gauge kind of what the magnitude of the revenue and expenses might be. But I think in order to do it right, it needs to have somebody come in and take a look at the specifics of both the public safety and then the general employees and talk a little bit about, develop what that compensation plan would look like.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, and that's a good point. I think anytime we put something on the ballot, I think it's also important to note that our renewals, even though they're every 5 years, have been very successful and well-received because we are able to share exactly what's been done and what major projects are completed and what wouldn't happen if this didn't pass. And I'm talking about the city renewal. And that is so well received. I think we need to also keep in mind that we have a lot of supporters that are going to be out in August, city supporters that are going to see the value in that. These really tie in so much together too, because when we look at our funding and we look at what we're doing every 5 years and also looking at public safety, this is something that a lot of municipal supporters and city supporters and people that see the value in this are going to see the value in both. So that's a benefit to having them both in August as well. So any other comments or, let's see, I saw.
I just want to talk about,
Swatter.
I just want to talk about the campaign part that Councilman Kempner had brought up earlier. I know that the FOP have been out to several organizations talking about this, and from what I've been told, not by just the FOP, but for members of the organizations, there's been a very positive response. But you're always going to have your naysayers on any type of tax. And I'm just fully supportive of this. Hope that we can put it on the August ballot. I'd like to see it have a sunset as well too. So, but I'm just listening. Certainly very much open forward to forward August, because the same people who are going to vote for it or against it in August is going to do the same thing in November, I think.
And I think it would be good to have us decide somewhat, or get at least a consensus somewhat of what we may want to look at for Monday night, so that way the public could give us some feedback too, because we're not making that decision tonight. So just a reminder. Councilman Fitzwater?
I just had a question for Mr. Kroll. Do you have the discretion or the authority to do that study, or do you need direction from city council to expend dollars if we were to decide to go that route?
That's a good question. I think I have the authority, if I can find the money, to be able to do that, and probably could out of salary savings, at least if we anticipated those. I don't know how long it would take. It certainly depends on the extent of that review. Certainly want to have conversation with FOP and the union on that as well. So to answer your question, yes, I think I can do it. The understanding by council that it would be salary savings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. So it's currently on the informal calendar is the August ballot. So this is looking at item 1, decision point. We have 3 decision points. So that's what's currently there. So unless anyone would maybe feel very, very strongly about changing that, we've heard some discussion tonight, but at this point, that's what's out there. And so we want the public to know and gain input and feedback in the next week, because we'll make the final decision a week from tonight. So anything more to add that item? The next item is the time period of the tax, perpetual or ongoing. Currently, I believe the current language says no sunset, but there are some amendments that we will decide next Monday that are either 7-year, 15-year, or 20-year. So is there any comments, discussion on that item? Councilman Hensley?
Thank you very much. Well, as Mr. Carl's presentation made pretty clear, the other Missouri cities in our general size range, with the exception, I guess, of 1.5 cities, don't have sunset provisions. So, and, I think it's easy to conflate sales tax H discussion, which of course sunsets every 5 years and has to be renewed, with the public safety tax that's being discussed, because we all seem to have sales tax H on the brain. But, 1/3 of our general fund dollars come from sales taxes already. And the use of, these new dollars would be to have a dedicated supplemental source of funding for public safety purposes. So, this is just like, I think, general sales tax that we already collect that funds 1/3 of our general fund. So, I don't necessarily think that it's essential that we have sunset on this. Consensus of the group is that we should have a sunset on it for any number of reasons. St. Joe has a 20-year sunset. I don't have any reason to think that that's not reasonable. And it looks like the part of Capes that sunsets is also 20. So maybe that's the norm. Seems reasonable to me. So if we were going to go with the sunset, 20-year mark, probably be the way to go.
Councilman Hensley, and I saw Councilman Hussey's hand over.
Thank you. I would probably echo a lot of what Councilman Hensley just said. I know that the 7-year was thrown out, and I think it was to sort of get it off the cycle of capital improvement, but also a 7-year or any odd sort of 9-year, 11 usually speaks to a specific purpose in my mind, that you're doing 7 years because there's a project that takes 7 years. Otherwise, I think people think in 5, 10, 15, 20-year increments. I would go back to Councilmember Wiseman's comments at the last meeting about her concerns just with the sunset in general. And I think that if the tax is dedicated with a significant portion addressing salaries and compensation, that on a period of time, work that plan through and have it in place, as opposed to every 5 or 6 or 7 years. It's like got a campaign maybe to fund a department and fund people's jobs, and be faced with, if it doesn't renew, to cut staff and cut back those things. I would have, based on the data from other cities, it seems to me that a long sunset is probably to give proof and show how this tax works and that the city is being a good steward of those public dollars. And so I can't say that I've had a whole lot of outreach to me of folks who their decision about supporting or opposing is strictly based solely on a sunset. So I don't know if it's really a higher push. It's back to use of it, for me at least.
Thank you. Any other comments, Councilman Fitzwater?
Well, I would just ask, and I appreciate those comments, and I was not involved in the drafting of the original two that came to council, but at some point, both of those came with a sunset provision, kind of heading a different route. Some of the discussions, we haven't made the final decision. What was kind of the change in thought? Because coming out, there was sunsets on both. I think they were just differing amounts.
Thought the one that's currently there has no sunset, but the original one, but the amendments are 7, 15, or 20, I believe. So tonight, or do I have that backwards?
I think there's some variation. I think that at least my understanding was the proposed amendments or substitute bills were simply to present options to the council to say, here's a variety of path. I assume some members maybe heard some feedback about, oh, what would a sunset look like? And so I took it more, the original was no sunset, but here were some options. If the council wanted to take a path of a sunset, they were just already laid.
And then in the meantime, we had asked staff to gather the information, which is in our packet, about what do other cities have that are comparable with us, and that's where the other 19 cities have come in with only a couple of them having a sunset at all and being the 20-year, just to see what do other cities do with their public safety tax. Councilman Graham?
That is correct. The original did not have a sunset in it. And as Chair of Public Safety, I just asked Mr. Molman if he would look at what it would look like, drawing up something, different amendments with sunsets. So that's how the sunset amendments got to our packet, so. And that was from having conversations with other people, including people in the community. Conversations with, so that we can have different options to look at. Sunset came up.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilman
Well,
Hussey?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the county law enforcement tax, that 1/8 portion that's about to expire, that's a 15-year sunset there, because voters approved that tax in the summer, August of 2007. And then that tax, I think, kicked in 2008. So it expires at the end of 22. So that tax itself was a 15-year. So there was a long time dedicated to that particular tax.
But I also think it was capital related, jail.
Some of it, but that's been, I mean, some of those dollars are to fund the department as well. That's not, I don't think, my understanding is that tax, while it was sold and really campaigned on about the new jail, that's also funding operate, and they're keeping 3/8 of the halves. My math is correct, 3/8 of the half cent. It's just that 1/8 that gets to sunset.
So looking at the question then of, we would want to make a suggestion so that the public would know what council is leaning towards for Monday night so that they can give feedback and input, is while what's currently on the informal calendar has none, and there are other amendments, that we found that the 20-year is what is comparable with other cities. Actually, it's not comparable. Most of them are none, but the few that have them, that is a 20-year. There's nothing we found that's less than 20. From the comments I've heard, it sounds like that may be the direction. If that's anything different, let us know so the public can have some feedback and be aware of maybe what direction will go, but we'll make that decision tonight. So anything more on that? And then the third item is projected uses of anticipated revenues from the tax, and talked about a few of them and heard from over the last year or more really. Things like salary and compression and body cameras, potential uses, whether it's talking about a fire station or what may be in fire. There's a growing list of capital needs, we know that, and that list, these are all potential uses that could be looked at, and then potential needs could be determined by police and fire leadership, working with council and city staff and working together to come up with that. So if there's any other feedback and comments, and those are things that will be more detailed later, but that's sort of an overall general. Councilman Graham?
Yes, just to clarify, when we say, working with, police and fire leadership, are we talking FOP and local 671, or talking just the two chiefs and city administrator?
I would think everybody working together would make this a success.
Yeah, FOP and local 671. I totally agree with that.
Other questions, comments, feedback?
This is,
Councilman Lester and then Councilman Hussey?
okay, this doesn't have to do with what it's used for, which, but I was thinking the effective date, maybe we should make it April 1st instead of January 1st to synchronize it when that comes off.
Might be determined already. I don't know that we can change that depending on what the election is, or can we change that? Sure.
I don't know, you're talking about April of 22?
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of January.
Yeah, I think, unless Margie's got a different answer, I think that effective date is flexible. One of the challenges we have, though, is too much earlier. We have to get it through the Department of Revenue, and then, quite frankly, if you want us, staff and union and FOP to come up with a compensation plan, that's going to take a while. I mean, even if we're refreshing some of the numbers that we have, that's going to take a while to get all those specifics together. So I don't think any earlier, and I think there's flexibility in going later if that's the question. Not really sure about if there's something magic about the January 22nd date and whether you could go later. I think you could, but I'm sure we'd have to find.
Councilman Hussey?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would clarify again once more that the ballot language is written for us by the state statutes along with the uses of the public safety tax to include but not limited to expenditures on equipment, city employees' salaries and benefits, and facilities for police, fire, and emergency medical providers. And I think that, so in my eyes, the sunset question, further specification of how the dollars are spent might be a little bit tied together. If the decision is to go with no sunset or a lengthy 20-year period, it's probably not wise to get so specific maybe in some of those uses, because it's very hard to predict what the uses of public safety departments would have years down the road. I think our ability to be specific on the capital improvement sales tax is because it is in a 5-year increment. We sort of know those needs, we can address them. We know that money is short-term, we take care of them. I agree and share the concerns that have been shared tonight about some specifics and some details. I don't know if it needs to be detailed to the point of 22% of it's going to go to this particular category. But I do know that the message to the voters, the message that's given by the FOP, all of that needs to have a consistency to it. And I do think that it's probably wise. I get that it's really hard to put a number on salaries and personnel costs and what that's going to look like. But I do think that there's ways to communicate to say, look, that's a particular issue that we're going to work to address by the passage of this tax, and whether you put a lump sum dedicated toward it or whatever, There's a growing list of equipment needs. I know body cameras have been mentioned multiple times. Do you think that there's a significant portion of the community that's looking at that particular piece of equipment and specifically, and hope that something like this can address that? In terms of when decisions need to be made about how these dollars are allocated, I get that it's an ongoing process. I don't expect us tonight to say that with accuracy to say this is exactly how it's going to be spent. But I think that the track record of the capital improvement sales tax permits us to maybe not have each project figured out in that particular tax, because for the most part, the community knows that you said you were going to spend 20% on a particular line item. You've done that for 3 decades. Trust it'll happen again. But I do think that collectively, this succeeds better at the ballot box if this council is behind it. So I go back to your point, Mayor, to say a final decision would be made. This council still has an additional meeting after that to make that decision. I guess I would say that, like, I want to make sure that we are all in a place to vote with confidence to support this, because the wrong message to send to the public is a divided vote here to place this on the ballot. Because then it looks like the council can't even be in this particular issue. We can spin it however we want to spin it to say this is why I voted no. The optics are split vote at the council to support this. They haven't figured out how they're going to use this. Why should I vote? So there's my prod a little bit to some folks around the table here this evening that want some more specifics to, let's just say, instead of saying we want some more specifics or we want to have greater definition, let's at least say, what does that look like? We know generate about $2.8 million. We know what the departmental budget is. We have the pie chart that talks about the razor margin. What are some things we feel comfortable saying, recognizing that it doesn't go in the ballot language? It's not something that the voters specifically voted. Is there a consensus around the table this evening to say that it will, we want a significant portion to address salary and personnel cost? Want it to go to body cameras? I don't know. I'm trying to make sure we have some conversation. My hope would be that whenever a vote is taken to put this on the ballot, it's a 10-0 vote.
Councilman Hussey, Councilman Hensley.
Thank you. And I echo a lot of what Councilman Hussey just said. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the long term, keeping some flexibility to allow the future to bring what it will without handcuffing ourselves right now about how we could use these funds years and years down the road. Immediate term, though, have to fix the salary problem. I think have to buy body cameras. There's any doubt from what I'm that those are 2 things that are strongly supported. And also making clear that these new dollars would simply be supplementing those current budgets that fund all sorts of things that departments to operate well. So, yeah, without limiting ourselves further from what is currently permitted in the enabling statutes, I think the vocal about what we would do to fix these particular pressing issues.
You, Councilman Hensley, Councilman Lester.
I would just agree with that, but also think we need to really emphasize the salaries and retaining officers and not losing them to Columbia. and other places, that I think the FOP made such a presentation that is seriously deteriorating our department and good services for the citizens. We just need to step up and our salaries.
Thank you, Councilman Lester. Other comments, discussion? Councilman Fitzwater?
I was just going to comment, and, I appreciate all the comments around the table, and I don't disagree. Just think the better we can hone in, we're talking about year 1, not year 20, and trying to convince people. Talking about raising our sales tax by 12.5%. So I just think, the better job we can do of this sending the information out and distributing where it's going to be sent, I think gives us a much more effective chance. So I just hope we'll continue to work on that. And, I know there are good minds working on it. Feel that the information is being withheld. I just think, there's a lot of new information put together. So I do it. I think you need to get to that information. Appreciate the folks that have been working on it.
And also want to take a moment and thank our police and fire personnel that are here this evening, and those that aren't here that have been working on this, and we appreciate that, and our unions as well that have been working together on this. So thank you for continued work on this. We also have our police and fire chief here if we ever need clarification or further context or details as needed. They are also available, and we know they will be working very hard on this as well. Councilman Graham?
Oh, yes, I was going to ask, Madam Mayor, I know as we talk about our next council meeting, I was going to ask under public comments if we could add FOP and Local 671 to the council meeting.
I'll ask Mrs. Donaldson to add that. We do have public comment is the next item, so usually wrap up around 7. So is there any further comments before we go on to public comment? Do we have any public comment this evening? 0 on the line, it looks like 2, and none is here. Okay. So any last minute comments? I appreciate the, I think Councilman Wiseman is ready to appreciate the good discussion we've had. I think this was definitely worth having a work session. So thank you to all of you that worked hard to get a work session planned so we could have this good discussion, and to staff for coming up with the memo and the added information that we had asked for. Councilman Wiseman.
Move to adjourn until next.
Is there a second?
Second.
Or say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. We'll see you all back here 1 week from tonight, Monday night. Thank you.